Chapter 32. Night. Horses tramping. The village of Weatherbury was quiet as the graveyard in its midst, and the living were lying well nigh as still as the dead. The church clock struck 11. The air was so empty of other sounds that the whir of the clockwork immediately before the strokes was distinct, and so was the click of the same at their close. The notes flew forth with the usual blind obtuseness of inanimate things, flapping and rebounding among walls, undulating against the scattered clouds, spreading through their interstices into unexplored miles of space. Bathsheba's crannied and mouldy walls were tonight occupied only by Maryann, Liddy being, as was stated, with her sister, whom Bathsheba had set out to visit. A few minutes after 11 had struck, Maryann turned in her bed with a sense of being disturbed. She was totally unconscious of the nature of the interruption to her sleep. It led to a dream, and the dream to an awakening, with an uneasy sensation that something had happened. She left her bed, and looked out of the window. The paddock abutted on this end of the building, and in the paddock she could just discern by the uncertain grey a moving figure approaching the horse that was feeding there. The figure seized the horse by the forelock and led it to the corner of the field. Here she could see some object, which circumstances proved to be a vehicle, for after a few minutes spent apparently in harnessing, she heard the trot of the horse down the road, mingled with the sound of light wheels. Two varieties only of humanity could have entered the paddock with the ghost-like glide of that mysterious figure. They were a woman and a gipsy man. A woman was out of the question in such an occupation at this hour, and the comer could be no less than a thief, who might probably have known the weakness of the household on this particular night, and have chosen it on that account for his daring attempt. Moreover, to raise suspicion to conviction itself, there were gipsies in Weatherbury Bottom. Maryann, who had been afraid to shout in the robber's presence, having seen him depart, had no fear. She hastily slipped on her clothes, stumped down the disjointed staircase with its 100 creaks, ran to Coggan's, the nearest house, and raised an alarm. Coggan called Gabriel, who now again lodged in his house as at first, and together they went to the paddock. Beyond all doubt the horse was gone. "Hark!" said Gabriel. They listened. Distinct upon the stagnant air came the sounds of a trotting horse, passing up Longpuddle Lane, just beyond the gipsies' encampment in Weatherbury Bottom. "That's our Dainty, I'll swear to her step," said Jan. "Mighty me! Won't mis'ess storm and call us stupids when she comes back?" moaned Maryann. "How I wish it had happened when she was at home, and none of us had been answerable." "We must ride after," said Gabriel decisively. "I'll be responsible to Miss Everdene for what we do. Yes, we'll follow." "Faith, I don't see how," said Coggan. "All our horses are too heavy for that trick except little Poppet, and what's she between two of us? If we only had that pair over the hedge we might do something." "Which pair?" "Mr. Boldwood's, Tidy and Moll." "Then wait here till I come hither again," said Gabriel. He ran down the hill towards Farmer Boldwood's. "Farmer Boldwood's not at home," said Maryann. "All the better," said Coggan. "I know what he's gone for." Less than 5 minutes brought up Oak again, running at the same pace with 2 halters dangling from his hand. "Where did you find 'em?" said Coggan, turning round and leaping upon the hedge without waiting for an answer. "Under the eaves. I knew where they were kept," said Gabriel, following him. "Coggan, can you ride barebacked? There's no time to look for saddles." "Like a hero," said Jan. "Maryann, you go to bed," shouted Gabriel to her from the top of the hedge. Springing down into Boldwood's pastures, each pocketed his halter to hide it from the horses, who, seeing the men empty-handed, docilely allowed themselves to be seized by the mane, when the halters were dexterously slipped on. Having neither bit nor bridle, Oak and Coggan extemporized the former by passing the rope in each case through the animal's mouth and looping it on the other side. Oak vaulted astride, and Coggan clambered up by aid of the bank, when they ascended to the gate and galloped off in the direction taken by Bathsheba's horse and the robber. Whose vehicle the horse had been harnessed to was a matter of some uncertainty. Weatherbury Bottom was reached in 3 or 4 minutes. They scanned the shady green patch by the roadside. The gipsies were gone. "The villains," said Gabriel. "Which way have they gone, I wonder?" "Straight on, as sure as God made little apples," said Jan. "Very well. We are better mounted. We must overtake 'em," said Oak. "Now, on at full speed." No sound of the rider in their van could now be discovered. The road metal grew softer and more clayed as Weatherbury was left behind, and the late rain had wetted its surface to a somewhat plastic but not muddy state. They came to crossroads. Coggan suddenly pulled up Moll and slipped off. "What's the matter?" said Gabriel. "We must try and track him, since we can't hear him," said Jan, fumbling in his pockets. He struck a light and held the match to the ground. The rain had been heavier here, and all foot and horse tracks made previous to the storm had been abraded and blurred by the drops, and there were now so many little scoops of water which reflected the flame of the match like eyes. One set of tracks was fresh and had no water in them. One pair of ruts was also empty, and not small canals like the others. The footprints forming this recent impression were full of information as to pace. They were in equidistant pairs, 3 or 4 feet apart, the right and left foot of each pair being exactly opposite one another. "Straight on!" exclaimed Jan. "Tracks like that mean a stiff gallop. No wonder we don't hear 'em. And the horse is harnessed. Look at the ruts. Aye, that's our mare sure enough." "How do you know?" "Old Jimmy Harris only shoed her last week, and I'd swear to his make among 10,000. "The rest of the gipsies must have gone on earlier or some other way," said Oak. "You saw there were no other tracks." "True." They rode along silently for a long weary time. Coggan carried an old pinchbeck repeater, which he had inherited from some genius in his family, and it now struck one. He lighted another match and examined the ground again. "'Tis a canter now," he said, throwing away the light. "A twisty, rickety pace for a gig. The fact is, they overdrove her at starting. We shall catch 'em yet." Again they hastened on, and entered Blackmore Vale. Coggan's watch struck 1. When they looked again, the hoof marks were so spaced as to form a sort of zigzag if united, like the lamps along a street. "That's a trot, I know," said Gabriel. "Only a trot now," said Coggan cheerfully. "We shall overtake him in time." They pushed rapidly on for yet 2 or 3 miles. "Ah, a moment," said Jan. "Let's see how she was driven up this hill. 'Twill help us." A light was promptly struck upon his gaiters as before, and the examination made. "Hurrah!" said Coggan. "She's walked up here, and well she might. We shall get him in 2 miles for a crown." They rode 3 and listened. No sound was to be heard save a mill pond trickling hoarsely through a hatch, and suggesting gloomy possibilities of drowning by jumping in. Gabriel dismounted when they came to a turning. The tracks were absolutely the only guide as to the direction that they now had, and great caution was necessary to avoid confusing them with some others which had made their appearance lately. "What does this mean, though I guess?" said Gabriel, looking up at Coggan as he moved the match over the ground about the turning. Coggan, who no less than the panting horse had latterly shown signs of weariness, again scrutinized the mystic characters. This time only 3 were of the regular horseshoe shape. Every 4th was a dot. He screwed up his face and emitted a long "Phew!" "Lame," said Oak. "Yes, Dainty is lamed, the near foot afore," said Coggan slowly, staring still at the footprints. "We'll push on," said Gabriel, remounting his humid steed. Although the road along its greater part had been as good as any turnpike road in the country, it was nominally only a byway. The last turning had brought them to the high road leading to Bath. Coggan recollected himself. "We shall have him now," he exclaimed. "Where?" "Sherton turnpike. The keeper of that gate is the sleepiest man between here and London. Dan Randall, that's his name. Knowed en for years, when he was at Casterbridge gate. Between the lameness and the gate 'tis a done job." They now advanced with extreme caution. Nothing was said until, against the shady background of foliage, 5 white bars were visible, crossing their route a little way ahead. "Hush! We are almost close," said Gabriel. "Amble upon the grass," said Coggan. The white bars were blotted out in the midst by a dark shape in front of them. The silence of this lonely time was pierced by an exclamation from that quarter. "Hoy! Ahoy! Gate!" It appeared there had been a previous call which they had not noticed, for on their close approach the door of the turnpike house opened, and the keeper came out half dressed, with a candle in his hand. The rays illuminated the whole group. "Keep the gate closed!" shouted Gabriel. "He has stolen the horse." "Who?" said the turnpike man. Gabriel looked at the driver of the gig, and saw a woman, Bathsheba, his mistress. On hearing his voice she had turned her face away from the light. Coggan had, however, caught sight of her in the meanwhile. "Why, 'tis mistress, I'll take my oath," he said, amazed. Bathsheba it certainly was, and she had by this time done the trick she could do so well in crises not of love, namely, mask a surprise by coolness of manner. "Well, Gabriel?" she inquired quietly. "Where are you going?" "We thought—" began Gabriel. "I am driving to Bath," she said, taking for her own use the assurance that Gabriel lacked. "An important matter made it necessary for me to give up my visit to Liddy and go off at once. What, then, were you following me?" "We thought the horse was stole." "Well, what a thing! How very foolish of you not to know that I had taken the trap and horse. I could neither wake Maryann nor get into the house, though I hammered for 10 minutes against her window sill. Fortunately I could get the key of the coach house, so I troubled no one further. Didn't you think it might be me?" "Why should we, miss?" "Perhaps not. Why, those are never Farmer Boldwood's horses. Goodness mercy, what have you been doing, bringing trouble upon me in this way? What, mustn't the lady move an inch from her door without being dogged like a thief?" "But how was we to know, if you left no account of your doings?" expostulated Coggan. "And ladies don't drive at these hours, miss, as a general rule of society." "I did leave an account, and you would have seen it in the morning. I wrote in chalk on the chalk house doors that I had come back for the horse and gig and driven off, that I could arouse nobody, and should return soon." "But you'll consider, ma'am, that we couldn't see that till it got daylight." "True," she said, and though vexed at first, she had too much sense to blame them long or seriously for a devotion to her that was as valuable as it was rare. She added, with a very pretty grace, "Well, I really thank you heartily for taking all this trouble, but I wish you had borrowed anybody's horses but Mr. Boldwood's." "Dainty is lame, miss," said Coggan. "Can ye go on?" "It was only a stone in her shoe, and I got down and pulled it out 100 yards back. I can manage very well, thank you. I shall be in Bath by daylight. Will you now return, please?" She turned her head, the gateman's candle shimmering upon her quick clear eyes as she did so, passed through the gate, and was soon wrapped in the embowering shades of mysterious summer boughs. Coggan and Gabriel put about their horses, and fanned by the velvety air of this July night, retraced the road by which they had come. "A strange vagary, this of hers, isn't it, Oak?" said Coggan, curiously. "Yes," said Gabriel, shortly. "She won't be in Bath by no daylight. Coggan, suppose we keep this night's work as quiet as we can?" "I'm of one and the same mind." "Very well. We shall be home by 3 o'clock or so, and can creep into the parish like lambs." Bathsheba's perturbed meditations by the roadside had ultimately evolved a conclusion that there were only 2 remedies for the present desperate state of affairs. The first was merely to keep Troy away from Weatherbury till Boldwood's indignation had cooled. The second, to listen to Oak's entreaties and Boldwood's denunciations, and give up Troy altogether. Alas! Could she give up this new love, induce him to renounce her by saying she did not like him, could no more speak to him and beg him for her good to end his furlough in Bath and see her and Weatherbury no more? This was a picture full of misery, but for a while she contemplated it firmly, allowing herself nevertheless, as girls will, to dwell upon the happy life she would have enjoyed had Troy been Boldwood, and the path of love the path of duty, inflicting upon herself gratuitous tortures by imagining him the lover of another woman after forgetting her, for she had penetrated Troy's nature so far as to estimate his tendencies pretty accurately, but unfortunately loved him no less in thinking that he might soon cease to love her, indeed considerably more. She jumped to her feet. She would see him at once. Yes, she would implore him by word of mouth to assist her in this dilemma. A letter to keep him away could not reach him in time, even if he should be disposed to listen to it. Was Bathsheba altogether blind to the obvious fact that the support of a lover's arms is not of a kind best calculated to assist the resolve to renounce him? Or was she sophistically sensible, with a thrill of pleasure, that by adopting this course of getting rid of him she was ensuring a meeting with him, at any rate once more? It was now dark, and the hour must have been nearly 10. The only way to accomplish her purpose was to give up her idea of visiting Liddy at Yalbury, return to Weatherbury Farm, put the horse into the gig, and drive at once to Bath. The scheme seemed at first impossible. The journey was a fearfully heavy one, even for a strong horse, at her own estimate, and she much underrated the distance. It was most venturesome for a woman, at night and alone. But could she go on to Liddy's and leave things to take their course? No, no, anything but that. Bathsheba was full of a stimulating turbulence, besides which caution vainly prayed for a hearing. She turned back towards the village. Her walk was slow, for she wished not to enter Weatherbury till the cottagers were in bed, and particularly till Boldwood was secure. Her plan was now to drive to Bath during the night, see Sergeant Troy in the morning before he set out to come to her, bid him farewell, and dismiss him. Then to rest the horse thoroughly, herself to weep the while, she thought, starting early the next morning on her return journey. By this arrangement she could trot Dainty gently all the day, reach Liddy at Yalbury in the evening, and come home to Weatherbury with her whenever they chose, so nobody would know she had been to Bath at all. Such was Bathsheba's scheme, but in her topographical ignorance as a late-comer to the place, she misreckoned the distance of her journey as not much more than half what it really was. This idea she proceeded to carry out, with what initial success we have already seen. Chapter 33. In the Sun, a Harbinger. A week passed, and there were no tidings of Bathsheba, nor was there any explanation of her Gilpin's rig. Then a note came from Mary Ann, stating that the business which had called her mistress to Bath still detained her there, but that she hoped to return in the course of another week. Another week passed. The oat harvest began, and all the men were afield under a monochromatic lammas sky, amid the trembling air and short shadows of noon. Indoors nothing was to be heard save the droning of bluebottle flies. Out of doors the whetting of scythes and the hiss of tressy oat ears rubbing together as their perpendicular stalks of amber yellow fell heavily to each swathe. Every drop of moisture, not in the men's bottles and flagons in the form of cider, was raining as perspiration from their foreheads and cheeks. Drought was everywhere else. They were about to withdraw for a while into the charitable shade of a tree in the fence, when Coggan saw a figure in a blue coat and brass buttons running to them across the field. "I wonder who that is," he said. "I hope nothing is wrong about mistress," said Mary Ann, who, with some other women, was tying the bundles, oats always being sheafed on this farm. "But an unlucky token came to me indoors this morning. I went to unlock the door and dropped the key, and it fell upon the stone floor and broke into 2 pieces. Breaking a key is a dreadful bodement. I wish missus was home." "'Tis Cain Ball," said Gabriel, pausing from whetting his reap-hook. Oak was not bound by his agreement to assist in the cornfield, but the harvest month is an anxious time for a farmer, and the corn was Bathsheba's, so he lent a hand. "He's dressed up in his best clothes," said Matthew Moon. "He've been away from home for a few days since he's had that felon upon his finger, for he said, 'Since I can't work, I'll have a holiday.'" "A good time for one, an excellent time," said Joseph Poorgrass, straightening his back, for he, like some of the others, had a way of resting a while from his labour on such hot days for reasons preternaturally small, of which Cain Ball's advent on a weekday in his Sunday clothes was one of the first magnitude. "'Twas a bad leg allowed me to read the Pilgrim's Progress, and Mark Clark learnt all fours in a whitlow." "Ay, and my father put his arm out of joint to have time to go courting," said Jan Coggan, in an eclipsing tone, wiping his face with his shirt-sleeve and thrusting back his hat upon the nape of his neck. By this time Cainy was nearing the group of harvesters, and was perceived to be carrying a large slice of bread and ham in one hand, from which he took mouthfuls as he ran, the other being wrapped in a bandage. When he came close his mouth assumed the bell shape, and he began to cough violently. "Now, Cainy," said Gabriel sternly, "how many more times must I tell you to keep from running so fast when you be eating? You choke yourself some day, that's what you'll do, Cain Ball." replied Cain. "The crumb of my victuals went the wrong way. That's what 'tis, Mr. Oak. And I've been visiting to Bath because I had a felon on my thumb. Yes, and I've seen—" Directly Cain mentioned Bath, they all threw down their hooks and forks and drew around him. Unfortunately, the erratic crumb did not improve his narrative powers, and the supplementary hindrance was that of a sneeze, jerking from his pocket his rather large watch, which dangled in front of the young man, pendulum-wise. "Yes," he continued, directing his thoughts to Bath and letting his eyes follow, "I've seen the world at last, and I've seen our missus." "Bother the boy," said Gabriel. "Something is always going the wrong way down your throat, so that you can't tell what's necessary to be told." "There, please, Mr. Oak, and that have just slid into my stomach and brought the cough on again." "Yes, that's just it. Your mouth is always open, you young rascal." "'Tis terrible bad to have a gnat fly down your throat, poor boy," said Matthew Moon. "Well, at Bath you saw," prompted Gabriel. "I saw her mistress," continued the junior shepherd, "and a soldier walking along. And by they got closer and closer, and then they went arm and crook, like courting complete, like courting complete, courting complete." Losing the thread of his narrative at this point, simultaneously with his loss of breath, their informant looked up and down the field, apparently for some clue to it. "Well, I see our missus and a soldier—" "Damn the boy," said Gabriel. "'Tis only me manner, Mr. Oak, if you'll excuse it," said Cain Ball, looking reproachfully at Oak, with eyes drenched in their own dew. "Here's some cider for him, that'll cure his throat," said Jan Coggan, lifting a flagon of cider, pulling out the cork and applying the whole to Cainy's mouth. Joseph Poorgrass, in the meantime, beginning to think apprehensively of the serious consequences that would follow Cainy Ball's strangulation in his cough, and the history of his Bath adventures dying with him. "For my poor self, I always say, 'Please God,' afore I do anything," said Joseph, in an unboastful voice. "And so should you, Cain Ball. 'Tis a great safeguard, and might perhaps save you from being choked to death some day." Mr. Coggan poured the liquor with unstinted liberality at the suffering Cain's circular mouth, half of it running down the side of the flagon, and half of what reached his mouth running down the outside of his throat, and half of what ran in going the wrong way, and being coughed and sneezed around the persons of the gathered reapers in the form of a cider fog, which for a moment hung in the sunny air like a small exhalation. "There's a great clumsy sneeze! Why can't ye have better manners, you young dog?" said Coggan, withdrawing the flagon. "The cider went up my nose," cried Cainy as soon as he could speak, "and now 'tis gone down my neck, and into my poor dumb felon, and over my shiny buttons and all my best clothes." "The poor lad's cough is terrible unfortunate," said Matthew Moon, "and a great history on hand too. Bump his back, shepherd." "'Tis my nater," mourned Cain. "Mother says I always was so excitable when my feelings were worked up to a point." "True, true," said Joseph Poorgrass. "The Balls always were a very excitable family. I know the boy's grandfather, a truly nervous and modest man, even to genteel refinery. 'Twas blush, blush with him, almost as much as it is with me. Not but that it's a fault in me." "Not at all, Master Poorgrass," said Coggan. "'Tis a very noble quality in ye." "Well, I wish to noise nothing abroad, nothing at all," murmured Poorgrass diffidently. "But we be born to things, that's true. Yet I would rather my trifle were hid, though perhaps a high nater is a little high, and at my birth all things were possible to my Maker, and he may have begrudged no gifts. But under your bushel, Joseph, under your bushel with ye. A strange desire, neighbours, this desire to hide and no praise due. Yet there is a Sermon on the Mount with a calendar of the blessed at the head, and certain meek men may be named therein." "Cainey's grandfather was a very clever man," said Matthew Moon. "Invented a apple tree out of his own head, which is called by his name to-day, the early ball. You know him, Jan. A quarrenden grafted from a Tom Putt, and a rather ripe upon top of that again. 'Tis true, 'a used to bide about in a public house with a woman in a way he had no business to by rights, but there, 'a were a clever man in the sense of the term." "Now then," said Gabriel impatiently, "what did you see, Cain?" "I seed our missus go into a sort of park place, where there's seats and shrubs and flowers, arm and crook with a soldier," continued Cain firmly, and with a dim sense that his words were very effective as regarded Gabriel's emotions. "And I think the soldier was Sergeant Troy, and they sat together for more than half an hour, talking moving things, and she once was crying almost to death, and when they came out her eyes were shining, and she was as white as a lily, and they looked into one another's faces as far gone friendly as a man and woman can be." Gabriel's features seemed to get thinner. "Well, what did you see besides?" "Oh, all sorts." "White as a lily. You are sure 'twas she?" "Oh yes." "Well, what besides?" "Great glass windows to the shops, and great clouds in the sky, full of rain, and old wooden trees in the country round." "You Stumpall, what'll you say next?" said Coggan. "Let un alone," interposed Joseph Poorgrass. "The boy's meaning is that the sky and earth in the kingdom of Bath is not altogether different from ours here. 'Tis for our good to gain knowledge of strange cities, and as such the boy's words should be suffered, so to speak it." "And the people of Bath," continued Cain, "never need to light their fires except as a luxury, for the water springs up out of the earth ready boiled for use." "'Tis true as the light," testified Matthew Moon. "I've heard other navigators say the same thing." "They drink nothing else there," said Cain, "and seem to enjoy it, to see how they swaller it down." "Well, it seems a barbarian practice enough to us, but I dare say the natives think nothing of it," said Matthew. "And don't victuals spring up as well as drink?" asked Coggan, twirling his eye. "No, I own to a blot there in Bath, a true blot. God didn't provide 'em with victuals as well as drink, and 'twas a drawback I couldn't get over at all." "Well, 'tis a curious place, to say the least," observed Moon, "and it must be a curious people that live therein." "Miss Everdene and the soldier were walking about together, you say?" said Gabriel, returning to the group. "Ay, and she wore a beautiful gold-coloured silk gown, trimmed with black lace, that would have stood alone without legs inside if required. 'Twas a very winsome sight, and her hair was brushed splendid, and when the sun shone upon the bright gown and his red coat, my, how handsome they looked! You could see them all the length of the street." "And what then?" murmured Gabriel. "And then I went to Griffin's to have me boots hobbed, and then I went to Riggs's batty cake shop, and asked him for a pennyworth of the cheapest and nicest stales, that were all but blue mouldy, but not quite. And whilst I was chawing them down, I walked on and see that clock with a face as big as a bacon trendle." "But that's nothing to do with mistress." "I'm coming to that if you'll leave me alone, Mr. Oak,"
remonstrated Cainy. "If you excites me, perhaps you'll bring on my cough, and then I shan't be able to tell you nothing."
"Yes, let him tell it his own way," said Coggan. Gabriel settled into a despairing attitude of patience, and Cainy went on.
"And there were great large houses, and more people all the week long than at Weatherly Walking Club on White Tuesdays. And I went to grand churches and chapels, and how the parson would pray! Yes, he would kneel down and put up his hands together, and make the holy gold rings on his fingers gleam and twinkle in your eyes, that he'd earned by praying so excellent well. Ah, yes, I wish I lived there."
"Our poor Parson Thirdly can't get no money to buy such rings," said Matthew Moon thoughtfully. "And as good a man as ever walked. I don't believe poor Thirdly have a single one, even of the humblest tin or copper. Such a great ornament as they be to him on a dull afternoon, when he's up in the pulpit lighted by the wax candles. But 'tis impossible, poor man. Ah, to think how unequal things be!" "Perhaps he's made of different stuff than to wear 'em," said Gabriel grimly. "Well, that's enough of this. Go on, Cainy, quick."
"Oh, and the new style of parsons wear moustaches and long beards," continued the illustrious traveller, "and look like Moses and Aaron complete, and make we folks in the congregation feel all over like the children of Israel." "A very right feeling, very," said Joseph Poorgrass. "And there's two religions going on in the nation now, High Church and High Chapel, and, thinks I'll play fair. So I went to High Church in the morning, and High Chapel in the afternoon." "A right and proper boy," said Joseph Poorgrass. "Well, at High Church they pray singing, and worship all the colours of the rainbow, and at High Chapel they pray preaching, and worship drab and whitewash only. And then I didn't see no more of Mrs. Everdene at all."
"Why didn't you say so afore, then?" exclaimed Oak, with much disappointment. "Ah," said Matthew Moon, "she'll wish her cake dough if so be she's over intimate with that man." "She's not over intimate with him," said Gabriel indignantly. "She should know better," said Coggan. "Our missus has too much sense under they knots of black hair to do such a mad thing. You see, he's not a coarse, ignorant man, for he was well brought up," said Matthew dubiously. "'Twas only wildness that made him a soldier, and maids rather like your man of sin." "Now, Cain Ball," said Gabriel restlessly, "can you swear in the most awful form that the woman you saw was Miss Everdene?"
"Cain Ball, you no longer be a babe and suckling," said Joseph in the sepulchral tone the circumstances demanded. "And you know what taking an oath is. 'Tis a horrible testament, mind ye, which you should say and seal with your bloodstone, and the prophet Matthew tells us that on whomsoever it shall fall it will grind him to powder. Now, before all the workfolk here assembled, can you swear to your words, as the shepherd asks ye?" "Please no, Mr. Oak," said Cainy, looking from one to the other with great uneasiness at the spiritual magnitude of the physician. "I don't mind saying 'tis true, but I don't like to say 'tis damned true, if that's what you mane." "Cain, Cain, how can you?" asked Joseph sternly. "You be asked to swear in a holy manner, and you swear like wicked Shimei, the son of Gera, who cursed as he came. Young man, fie!" "No, I don't. 'Tis you want to squander a poor boy's soul, Joseph Poorgrass, that's what 'tis," said Cain, beginning to cry. "All I mane is that in common truth 'twas Miss Everdene and Sergeant Troy, but in the horrible so help me truth that you want to make of it, perhaps 'twas somebody else."
"There's no getting to the rights of it," said Gabriel, turning to his work. "Cain Ball, you'll come to a bit of bread," groaned Joseph Poorgrass. Then the reaper's hooks were flourished again, and the old sounds went on. Gabriel, without making any pretence of being lively, did nothing to show that he was particularly dull. However, Coggan knew pretty nearly how the land lay, and when they were in a nook together he said, "Don't take on about her, Gabriel. What difference does it make whose sweetheart she is, since she can't be yours?" "That's the very thing I say to myself," said Gabriel.